The concept of replay value is something I've heard brought up many times. It's a term that I think people pretty much know what it means, that being the idea of how replayable a game is. And that itself is pretty explanatory, but what this actually means in terms of what a game needs to have replay value isn't. Of course, you can't really quantify replay value. It's going to be different for every person who experiences the game. But what if you could? Is it possible to take a look at various examples of games and see if we can distill those ideas into a definition of what a game should have to have replay value? That's what I want to explore today. So right off the bat, I want to give a brief idea of what replay value means to me to get us on the same page. To me, it's the idea of being motivated to continue re-experiencing the content of a game even after the initial playthrough has been completed. This comes with certain distinctions. If you have beaten the game but there's still content you have yet to experience, then it doesn't impact replay value because it's not being replayed. A good example of this would be a game like Bloodstained: Curse of the Moon. In this game, after the initial playthrough where you see the credits, there's actually a second mode that you unlock where you play through the game again with different conditions. Now, the level structure is the same, but these additional playthroughs provide new paths through the levels, new abilities, and on completing them, additional endings. Then, there are other endings depending on some decisions you made throughout the game, so you can choose to go back and play those again to get all the different endings if you want. Now, to me, this isn't automatically good replay value because it offers more content after seeing the credits. It simply means you haven't fully experienced the game yet. The true replay value would be, after seeing all the endings, having an urge to go back and replay any of the campaigns that you already played. It would mean that even though you've experienced the full content of the game itself still continues to pull you back. These qualities of a game are what we are looking to define today. Another distinction I want to make can be shown from looking at a game like Breath of the Wild. In this game, the main story aspect can be completed fairly quickly if it's prioritized, but the rest of the content in the game is massive. To this day, there are still Koroks, quests, and shrines I've still not completed. It's definitely a testament to the amount of content in that game. But the idea of coming back to a game like this is not replay value, because when you come back and continue to explore, looking for things you haven't found, it's a new experience with new discoveries. Replay value in this case would be starting the game fresh to re-experience the shrines and the story, which, granted, if you didn't fully complete the game before, you would probably still find some new stuff along the way, but hopefully you see what I'm getting at. The game should have some inherent value for the player to re-experience content that they have already experienced. Now, this is different for something like an achievement system. These systems provide goals to you which may or may not unlock something, but they are almost always purely optional. In the case of achievements, the incentive to complete them generally comes after you've experienced everything, and they present challenges for the player as incentive to come back and keep playing the game. The rewards for these may not be that substantial. For example, many games just provide checklists of tasks that you complete, which may or may not earn you a trophy if you're playing on PlayStation, but no real in-game rewards. There are games that do provide rewards. A game like Hyrule Warriors can provide extra costumes for continuing to complete certain challenges on harder difficulties. Another game that does the achievement system really well is Kid Icarus Uprising, where you have many challenges you are presented with before and after you're done the main game, which help you to unlock new items, powers, weapons, or just give you rewards. But also, these challenges require you to play through levels with different difficulties and weapons, so they're not just extra additions that were tacked on to the game at the last minute. They actually provide additional experiences to supplement the game itself. So what I'm saying here is that achievements certainly are a contributor to replay value, but they don't automatically increase replay value for a game either. This is because it can potentially be artificial. I'm sure many of you have felt the slog of replaying games just to earn a certain item or a trophy or whatever, even if you aren't really enjoying it at the end, just because the developers had to put in some extra random conditions that classify as achievements. So while I do acknowledge this concept of achievements as a contributor to replay value, I think it's also fair to say that how much it contributes depends on other aspects of the game that make it enjoyable to replay. I also think we need to make sure to distinguish actual replay value with re-experiencing a game. What I mean by this is, let's say you have a game you really enjoyed and haven't played it in a while, and you decide you want to play it again because you liked it the first time. Does this mean the game has good replay value? Well, not necessarily, because it depends on the motivations of the person to replay the game. If they have forgotten many of the details about what goes on in the game, then this playthrough could be considered a re-experiencing as opposed to simply replaying the game. This might not make sense, but let's look at a game like Ace Attorney, which is a visual novel. In this game, the main appeal would be to experience the story, as the gameplay is mainly just advancing through text to further the plot. This is a game I would certainly say does not have good replay value, as what reason could people have to replay the story when they could move on to the sequel and continue the story? This is one reason why Let's Plays of these games are so popular. You get to re-experience the feeling of playing the game with someone who has not yet experienced it. This is to say that the initial experience of playing a game like this can't be replicated on subsequent playthroughs. But if you had played this game when you were younger, say like 15, remembered you enjoyed it and decided to play again when you were 30, then you most likely would have forgotten most of the plot details. So this would be much similar to a new playthrough than a replay. Hopefully you get what I'm trying to say, which is that replay value implies that you know what you're getting into. And one last point before we move on. We also have to make sure we distinguish replay value from the feeling we get when playing a game. I know that nostalgia is a thing, and we can have games that we love and constantly want to replay, and there's nothing wrong with this, but it's important to realize that this doesn't necessarily equate to replay value, as it's based on someone's personal feelings and may not be true for everyone. This could also be why some people rewatch movies. Even though you know what's going to happen, you still find some joy in re-experiencing it. So that's something else to keep in mind. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get on to the key point I want to talk about regarding actual replay value. This would be the idea of a variation in central mechanics. This is the idea that even though you know what the game will throw at you, the experience you get would be different each time. The easiest way to understand this would be to consider many genres of multiplayer games. Shooting games, fighting games, party games, racing games, stuff like that. This concept would be the same reason people watch sports. The rules and objectives don't change, but as soon as one tiny small thing different happens, the outcome is completely unknown. And this variance comes from the player. Different decisions, different executions, random outcomes, it could be anything. Because of this variance, there is the constantly changing outcome of either victory or defeat, which is certainly a strong motivator for someone to return to a game, that being if the outcome was not the desired one. But this idea of variance in central mechanics, can it be applied to other games where gameplay is not so unpredictable? Well, first let's look at platform games. In these types of games, the central mechanic is very set in stone. Walk, run, jump, roll, fly, slide, do whatever you have to do to reach the objective. In a game like the original Super Mario Bros., people have the entire game down to almost the frames in which the buttons are pressed. In another game like Banjo-Kazooie, you may know or see where things are, but you have to physically get to them. In both of these cases, on subsequent playthroughs, it's not about what you have to do, but how you do it. So what's the variance here? The variance here is your execution. You could consider these games as being tests of skill. And unfortunately, as humans are quite flawed, you might not always perform things the way you want to. So there's merit in trying these over and over to try and feel a sense of accomplishment. Next, let's look at a series like Pokemon. You might say that the battles do have a level of uncertainty to them, which is true. However, battles are only one small part of Pokemon games. The main reason people would replay these is to try out new teams and to play through the game with new Pokemon they have not tried before. Now, I should bring up what I said before about missing content not being considered replay value. Missing content wouldn't apply to certain choices a person makes to suit their own playstyle. This is the true variance in central mechanics when it comes to certain types of RPGs. What skills you give your characters, what equipment you give them, which party members you choose, how you train them. These are the variances that can yield the many experiences that come with RPGs. Fire Emblem is an example of a series that also does this. Not only do you have different options with which to reclass your units, but you choose which units you want to send out in each battle, which can lead to many different outcomes based on which types of units you deploy. Now, I realize that these points I mentioned also don't necessarily mean that there is replay value. I want to touch on what I call the dream playthrough. With a lot of these games, it's possible you might be thinking, Yeah, I get that there is variance in this game, but what if I'm happy with my performance and the choices I've made? What if I have no desire to experience these alternative choices? I mention this because I think it's important. Going back to Fire Emblem, the newest release, Fire Emblem Three Houses, has a few alternative paths you can play through the game with. Now, I mentioned before that I don't think this aspect would necessarily be related to replay value, since there's still a lot of content missing if you only play a single path. But in terms of which characters you use, which bonds you make between characters, and which supports you see, you may not fully experience what each character's interactions are with each other, but maybe you're still satisfied with what you played. Maybe you got a S support with the character you wanted, but still had characters you didn't really utilize. Then in that case, shouldn't that mean there's good replay value since the game provides many options to customize your playthrough? On its surface, yes, but if someone is content with the choices they make, then the desire may not be there. This is where it comes down to a person-by-person and a game-by-game basis. Simply saying that there is a variation in essential mechanics is, unfortunately, not enough to say a game has good replay value, as there will always be those who are satisfied with their initial playthrough and would find no additional pleasure in making new choices. Okay, so is that it? Are we left with saying that there's no way to define what a game needs to have replay value because it always comes down to personal preference? Well, maybe. Ultimately, no matter what we say, it will inevitably not be true for everyone who experiences the game. But to be honest, we wouldn't be talking about this if we were done here. I've come up with a statement I would like to present. A game has good replay value when it provides a variance in essential mechanics, such that either the outcome of the game is unknown, or even if it is known, the details of reaching it are not. Okay, so let's talk about what this means. The idea of outcome relates to whatever purpose the player is playing towards. I think most people would think that the outcome of a game would be considered seeing the credits or getting a victory in a game where that's possible, but I want to look at some new examples and see that this is not always the case when it comes to replay value. First, we have speedruns. Speedruns are a unique situation when it comes to replay value, as it's the idea of replaying nearly any game whether it has good replay value or not. So, how does our statement apply to speedruns? Don't you know the outcome of the game and the details of reaching it? Well, first, as we mentioned with platform games, the variance in essential mechanics can be how the player interacts with the game, not as much the game themselves. It also means that the outcome of the game is not always simply the act of finishing it, it could be measured in any metric that the player wants. Let's look at a game like Bayonetta, where in each chapter you have several battles to complete. At the end of each battle, you're given a rank, from stone to pure platinum, and at the end of the chapter you're ranked based on your overall performance of each battle. Once the game has been completed, if you went back to try and achieve a better score, it's no longer about completing the campaign. The outcome of the game has shifted to achieving a specific score in each level. This idea, which can be applied to many types of games, all revolves around the concept of a high score. The outcome of the game is some sort of metric that quantifies your performance. In arcade games like Pac-Man, it's about getting the highest score possible before dying. In puzzle games, it may be about seeing how long you can make it before the game overwhelms you, or how fast you're able to beat a puzzle. In rhythm games, it might be about achieving a full combo in a game like Guitar Hero. All of these games fall into the case where the variance in essential mechanics provide a different experience each time, which is tied to the player's performance, that can motivate them to keep replaying to achieve the outcome they want. So, to finish our explanation on speedruns, the outcome wouldn't be the fact that the game was beaten, it would be the time it takes the player to beat it. So since this is unknown, it fits into the first part of our replay value definition. Okay, so let's touch now on the case where the outcome is known, but the details of reaching it aren't. A good example to explain this would be a Zelda randomizer. Randomizers provide an interesting experience because the full content and outcome of the game are known, but the details of reaching it are not. This is because when you start a new randomizer seed, your beginning conditions will almost always never be the same. You might not get the sword until an hour through the playthrough, or you might get the mirror to go to the dark world right away. It provides a unique experience because the details of reaching the outcome are unknown. Now, randomizers might overlap a bit into the scenario of re-experience a game as opposed to replaying it, because it is a different experience each time you play it, although I feel it's still worth mentioning.
Okay.
But this scenario would be the one that applies to the types of games where your choices can affect the experience the game gives you, which we mentioned earlier with our discussions on RPGs. And one last point I want to make. If we take the definition and change it slightly, we're left with a definition that no longer applies to replay value, but does apply to initial playthroughs, which I'll call play value. A game has good play value when the outcome of the game and the details of reaching it are unknown. To me, this statement encapsulates why we play games. We are searching for games where we are provided with new experiences leading to unknown outcomes. It's also the same reason we watch videos, movies, shows, and read stories. This statement also fits to a game like Dungeons & Dragons, where each playthrough can be totally unique, and it's a journey that no one knows the outcome to. Now, you might be looking at this statement and think that many games that fit this description are just not good. And yeah, a game like E.T. on Atari certainly fits this description, but is by no means a good game. And that's something I really need to stress. Play value, and by extension replay value, are also functions of a game's quality. This isn't something we're addressing today, but you could easily tack on, "Oh, and the game has to be good," to either of our descriptions. So with that, let's look back. Does our statement on replay value hold up to scrutiny? It's hard to say. I'm sure it's very likely that there are people out there who have games they love to replay that don't fit this description, and games that do fit this description but have poor replay value. Of course, this definition is not meant to be taken as an absolute, but I found it interesting to look at distilling this broad idea into something tangible. I think we found that maybe this wasn't the easiest thing to do, but it was still fun to look at. If you have any thoughts on this, if I'm wrong or if you agree, please let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear what you think. This has been Blairbot. Thanks for watching.